And welcome back to my channel, where I'm going to cover additional customization options for the Bard class that were introduced in Xanathar's Guide to Everything. And as we know, D&D is a role-playing game. The overall idea is that while you're playing your character, you are taking on their persona and acting as they would. These customizations work in a way that gives you the means to add new details to your characters to help flesh out things like a bard's past or future works, maybe a little bit more personalization around the musical instruments that your character is using, as well as potentially providing you some embarrassing situations that they might have been involved in. But the new bard class sheet also introduces information on what inspires your bard to actually create such art, called their Muse. Xanathar's Guide to Everything has introduced new tables that you can make use of to provide inspiration on these very points, specifically for the Bard class characters. These tables are directly available from the class sheet specific to Xanathar's Guide to Everything. So if you pop open classes and you scroll down to the Bard class sheet representative of Xanathar's Guide to Everything here, rather than the Player's Handbook one, which you'll see here is very different, this gives you things like a defining work, the instrument, the embarrassment, and information on a bard's muse, whereas this is really just what is a bard and how do you make use of it and how do you create one, that kind of thing. In total, there are 3 new tables to pull inspiration from, or even potentially directly make use of the information when creating your character, as well as a short list of ideas that you might want to consider for your bard's muse. So let's take a look at the defining works table here. I'll pop that open and move that into place. This first table is around creating some defining work that your character has either already created or potentially could create in the future, and that might have been their breakout work, if you will, which is what made them famous. Now, it could be argued that a level 1 bard might not have enough fame or infamy to really have a defining work created just yet, but the table will allow you to come up with some ideas that you can make use of in the future. However, it could also be argued that to get to level 1, you had to have done something that pushed your character enough into the limelight to have achieved it. So you could use this table to define an early work that was what catapulted your character into the adventuring bardic lifestyle. I would argue that your character has most likely not yet written a defining work of any kind, as they're just starting in their career. So I would recommend making use of this table to plan out what your defined work will be by the time your character reaches level 5, and then maybe introduce new ones at levels 10, 15, and 20. The idea being that the higher level your character was when they wrote the work, the higher quality that work is going to be due to their higher level of experience with world events. And finally, at level 20, they now have enough experience to create that legendary work that will forever cement them in the annals of fame. The overall choice, however, is entirely up to you, but it is there to provide you examples as to what you might want to consider. If you do choose to create a defining work that is really there for a lower level character, or if you're creating a higher level character, the best location for this would be in your notes section. So you could either roll, make use of this to create your own thought, or just simply drag and drop something from the table. And that's really all it comes down to for adding that level of detail. You might want to adjust it a little bit and tweak it so that it incorporates itself into your notes fairly well. That way, if somebody asks you about it, you'll at least have some details and a bit of a backstory around it to be able to flesh out the whole work itself. The next option is a musical instruments table that allows you to flesh out more information about that instrument, giving you information on possibly its appearance, who made it, what it was made from, those kinds of things. This can help add a level of detail to your character's performances and gives you the means to make the musical instrument a little bit more personal to your character. And really, the only limitation is how imaginative you would like to be. The other use of this table is to provide a goal for your character, because they might have just a normal, run-of-the-mill lute, but your character has heard of a lute that is masterly crafted by an elvish craftsman that is known to provide music of such renown that it is able to enthrall audiences. But someone might say that, well, that's really just a magical item, and I would argue that that's not necessarily the case. The quality of the instrument will directly impact the quality of the performance. If you were to take a run-of-the-mill violin in today's world and compare that to a Stradivarius, the Stradivarius is going to have a richer, more musical note to it than your run-of-the-day violin is going to, just simply because of how well it's aged and how well it was crafted. But it means that this is kind of an overall goal for the bard in a way to entertain their audiences in a way that they can maximize their tips and exposure to increase their fame. And an instrument of this renown would only add to that effect of that performance, thus potentially giving your character a boost or a bonus during that performance. Now, the best spot to store this information is going to be in the details of the instrument itself. So, for example, this lyre, you could pop it open and then just simply modify the description down here to add in the details of what you rolled here, or whatever you came up with based off of what these rolls were, or the information, or you can just simply drag and drop the information down in there. That's going to be entirely up to you. But if it's something that your character is desiring after, then the best location for that is going to be in your notes field. And that is so that the dungeon master can make use of that information and potentially all of a sudden make it available. And I don't necessarily mean that someone's just going to walk up to your character, give you the instrument, and walk away. No, what I mean is that your character has sought and sought after this particular musical instrument, and just out of the blue, they decide to go into this one little random shop in a dinky little tiny town, and ta-da, there it is hanging on the wall. There's going to be a role-playing event around that particular kind of discovery, and that just adds to the overall story and potentially makes it more enjoyable to you as a player that, finally, I've got this thing. Now, another thing to consider is your bard's past. And at level 1, or as a low level bard, your character might not have had some very, let's say, professional performances, and some of them are very embarrassing in the situations that they were involved in. And as a result, those are going to be sort of part of your character's background. Other situations could have been during your performances, where some large animal, for example, got away from its handlers and ransacked the grounds, cutting your performance short. Well, as a performer, that's going to be very embarrassing to you. But it's also going to forever cement your character's history with that event, and you may not necessarily be able to outrun it. Because to think about it, I mean, it could open up some very amusing, if slightly awkward, conversations that might crop up over your character's adventuring career, if you will, if for some reason you return to the location of where that event actually occurred. So let's say you're going back around the town where the circus happened to have something get away during your performance. The people there are going to remember you very clearly as the bard who had their performance cut short, and that's going to be really embarrassing for your character. So you might get some jeering as part of your entry into town if anybody happened to recognize your character. But once again, there's no real limitation as to how much detail you would like to go into. It can be as little or as much as you want, even if you decide to do so. Now, the best spot for this is going to be in the notes section of your notes tab, and that is because the dungeon master could make use of those details to create little mini encounters that might occur if your character happens to return to that particular location at some point in the future. And as much detail as you want to be able to provide, where it happened, what was the event that happened, would allow them to flesh out that information, thus giving them a very informed encounter scenario that they could portray if you happen to pass through that city, or if they're going to actually make your party go through that town or city, thus giving everyone a little bit of a comedic moment, if you will, and maybe lightening the mood a little bit if it's been a little bit tense with some combat lately. Now, as for the bard's muse, it's really something that is inspiring your bard to be able to create the poetic or musical content that, or literary content that they're in the process of producing and releasing. And the details about that muse are going to help you create a little bit more in the way of informed works. And I don't mean you personally, but generally your character. You as a player are probably going to do nothing more than create a title in an entry in your notes section there, just to state that this particular bard created something like the Flying Fawn as a poem or a song of some kind, and you don't necessarily have to go into the level of detail about the whole poem unless you want to. I mean, it's entirely up to you. I have known some players that have done just that, and they have an entire, like, 30-page volume behind their character sheet covering all the stories and songs that they've written, that kind of thing. But even if you just have nothing more than a title, it at least gives a little bit of a cursory detail around that. But how that relates to your muse is going to come down to how your title is tied into it. So the Flying Fawn, for example, could be something that is based off of a character who uses nature as their muse, or happens to use wildlife as their muse, things like that. It's entirely up to you as to how little or large amount of detail, if you will, that you want to go into in this particular case. Now, really, my conclusion is going to be the same as it was for the Barbarian. It adds more customizations that you can use to make up your character's overall persona that you yourself will then assume while you're role playing if you're that kind of player. But it's entirely up to you. You don't necessarily have to go into that level of detail to still have an enjoyable time while running through a D&D session. The more experienced players are the ones who are looking to really take on their character's persona are going to be the ones that do this for the most part. But I still encourage you to at least look at the concept and consider it when you're creating your character because who knows, you might actually find that you enjoy it. But that does bring us to the end of this particular video, and I want to thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. I wish to thank you for taking the time to watch this particular video. I hope you found it informative and useful to familiarizing yourself with Fantasy Grounds in general, and that you had fun in the process. If you found the video useful and you liked the content of the particular video, go ahead and click that like button to let me know. And if you have any questions specific to the topic covered by this particular video, or just have some comments in general, please feel free to post something in the comments section, and I will do my best to respond to any questions that are asked. Additionally, I do release content quite regularly, and it's generally specific to Fantasy Grounds or 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons at this time. So if you'd like to be notified when new videos come out, go ahead and subscribe and click the notification bell to ensure that notification is sent to you when I release a new video.